All right, so only murders in the building. Which of the Pickwick triplets? Question. Obviously, the whole season arc is Steve Martin. You can't get through it. But obviously, from an editor standpoint, you must have had a similar challenge trying to pull that sequence off. So, what were the challenges in trying to do that sequence?
Oh wow! It was such a complicated sequence, even on the script pages. It opens with start split screen, and there were all these different stories being told at once. And so we went in with a plan of attack to sort of map it all out in pre-production, so that we knew where everything was going to go. And obviously we had the pre-record from Steve doing the whole song, which then we kind of had laid in as our tracks as like a bass, and then he would perform it live in these chunks. So we had like multiple chunks of little sections of the song, and then we're bringing it in, and it's a whole mosh podge, as you can imagine, of live recording, pre-record, and all of that, and it was a big puzzle, but it was so fun to put together for
And
us.
Steve, like, I was kind of shocked to learn how much he actually rehearses. Every little bit that we do in Murders, any joke, any song, anything, he rehearses. Even like a legend at his level. So he spent a lot of time rehearsing the song. Breaking it into bits was helpful, but from an editing challenge, he was just so great in every take. It's just such a joy to edit Steve Martin.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of editors who watch, student editors. So what would you advise? So I find they always struggle with the preparing portion of that. So how did you actually prepare? So if the students are trying to break down how they should break down the sequence, how would you prepare that sequence?
Ooh, that's such a good question. It was so fun, like, on Murders, I feel like there are so many different genres that you get to play with, which is, like, part of the joy of the show. And so when it was going to be a musical, I kind of grew up doing musical theater, and so I was like, oh, this is so fun to get to, like, experiment with that. And, when I was up in school and coming up in editing, I did music videos and friend music videos and that kind of stuff. And so I think doing that kind of work, like music videos or any sort of, like, fun stuff that you can just, like, practice editing, like, gets you the timing and the feeling of, like, how a sequence like that would come together. And so I think that's, like, always a good practice to do, to go in and just find music videos or even recut stuff that you see online as, like, good preparation for that kind of stuff.
And the other thing is, like, because he pre-recorded the song before we shot it, is listening to the song over and over beforehand and becoming really familiar with it. And then when we get his dailies, that's kind of our sacred time. So we would watch the dailies over and over before we even started cutting, so that we were really familiar with the takes, familiar with his performance, kind of knowing the landscape before you start digging in and editing something like that. Even though we had prepared the split screen sequence with title cards and kind of had a map going, you still had to kind of watch all your footage, kind of take a breath, and then say, okay, let's dive in.
Obviously, another challenge where you do the season finale, where you're really weaving the actual play, the actual musical, with the murder mystery. So for you, that is definitely generating blunders. So what was the approach of trying to do that episode? Because I'd say that's even more difficult.
That one was by far more difficult because, that song, that For the Sake of a Child song, was much longer, I guess, in a sense. It was much more choreographed in Meryl Streep and Paul Rudd's sort of situation, and we're intercutting that with, Selena up in the shaft thing with the murder. So it was harder to sort of, like, break in and out of the song, whereas, like, with the Pickwick triplet, it was all the way through. But this one we had to, like, create pauses where the music could sort of, like, keep the tension going for them to have the dialogue. And so mapping that out was super, super complicated, but it was great to have help from our amazing music team.
And actually having Payton, like, us co-editors, I would take a stab at it for a while, and then I would get stuck and say, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And so then he would step in and say, okay, let me see what you got. He would take a swing at it. And so there was a lot of back and forth and kind of helping each other where we were struggling. So we both were helping to figure it out. It was one of the most complicated sequences we've done in the 3 seasons we've been on the show.
Well, and it was one of those moments where it was really like editors being problem solvers. It was like, how do we make this sequence work with what was shot, getting through the song, telling these story points while keeping up the tension of one of our main characters' life is in danger. So there are all of these elements that you're trying to balance and keep going to, the climactic moment.
One thing I like about the show the most is sometimes after a few seasons the show gets a little stale or repetitive. You seem to be evolving up. Like you're doing more genre, you're doing more thing. The characters, everything seems to be going in a direction of expansion. Is that something you enjoy as editors, with the show just kind of going to this season too? It's just new stuff, not just the same old, same old.
Yeah, no question. It's what keeps the job interesting and fun. You know, like we're normally would jump from show to show or want to do a season 1 and then hop onto something else. And obviously, you know, we've been on Murders now since season 2, and there's a reason why we keep going back. It's also the people, you know, it's such a great environment of people and community. But yeah, I mean, they reinvent it every year, and it just keeps getting better and better. Every time we're with John and he pitches the new season, we're like, what? Like, it's always like insane, you know?
Yeah, and that is what's so enlightening about the show. Like having that footage, the musical footage was so beautiful and different than the footage we had in season 2. And then in season 4, you know, you've got this whole cast of characters and it's very different. Framing's different, rhythms are different. So yeah, as editors, it's very fulfilling to be able to do the same thing, but it's different.
Yeah, it's a little mental exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, are you allowed to say which of the Pickwick children did it?
I think they're still figuring it out. He might still be singing the song somewhere.
Our last question we like to ask is: I mentioned we have a lot of editing students in the audience. What film would you think, or television show, would you want them to study? Like, look at a master class in film or TV editing. What would you say? Oh, study this and follow, like, just as a way, as a blueprint.
Well, one of the movies that really inspired me when I was, you know, younger and really acknowledging that I wanted to be a filmmaker and editor in particular was Whiplash. The way that movie is cut is so inspiring and rhythmic and dynamic, and yeah, I just think like it's such a beautiful showcase of what the power of editing, and I think it's super impactful. So I always recommend that one.
That's good. 'Cause I don't have an answer. I would say for me, growing up with parents who loved movies, I watched a little bit of everything. I would watch dramas, musicals, you know, romance, independent cinema. My parents turned me on to the Coen brothers and Blood Simple, like kind of watching as much different kind of genres as you can.
Our question, as a cinematographer question, what was your first gut reaction when you read the script of City of Dreams?
Ooh, that it's powerful, and it's going to be a lot of work. I mean, it was chase sequences, oneers, a huge cast ensemble, a lot of stunt sequences. We had a police raid with like 30, 40 plus extras, with full-blown SWAT uniforms, police cars swarming in. I mean, everything like that was just daunting. And especially because I came onto the project about a week before we started shooting. So I originally started as the second unit director of photography. I was brought in by Alejandro Chavez, who was main unit. And I was also the B camera operator on my main unit. So I was thrown in right away. And then eventually, you know, as post-COVID, once we resumed shooting, I was promoted to the main unit DP. But yeah, it was a hit the ground running and just go, go, go.
So you have child trafficking, of course, theme. How did you approach shooting the intimate scenes with the children?
It took a lot of time. Obviously, you got to get them in the right headspace. Mo was fantastic. Our director, he built a relationship with Ari, the main child lead, a very close bond. So Ari not only trusted him, but he trusted the entire crew. I mean, there's some very, very intimate and very brutal scenes in there, and if you don't give them the time to shoot that, it could go bad. So we took our time. It was something that relationships and building those relationships of trust on set was the first priority for Mo. And yeah, it just took a long time to shoot, but that's how it should be done. I mean, being very courteous to respecting the boundaries of the talent.
And so we have the very intimate scenes, but you say you're running around in L.A., running, gunning type stuff. How was that process, or the running gun process? Let's call it.
It's funny how, like, that was day one was the beginning of that, or actually in the theatrical cut, it's like halfway through it, but day one was the chase sequence. And so I'm walking onto set, and Mo had already shot on his iPhone pretty much a pre-stitched together idea of what this like 10-minute oneer is going to be. obviously an iPhone moves a little differently than an ARRI Alexa Mini with master primes and Teradek build and all this kind of stuff on top of it. So watching Alejandro sprint through the streets, and then the next take, you know, he'd get arrested and I'd be in and I'd be doing the sprint, and you're having to not only chase this young kid through the streets at full speed holding a camera that weighs 30 plus pounds and trying to maintain your frame and not hit the horizons off and make sure you wipe at the right time, because that wipe is going to be stitched together with the other wipe for the next shot we do after that. It took a lot of work. I mean, we were setting up Teradek arrays all through the city in that those block areas, just so we could have service and signal for the ACs to pull focus, because we were covering blocks and blocks at a time. This is when we did this. It was 2018, so even then the Teradek arrays were nowhere near as strong as they are today. So it was literally hitting the ground running. But having Mo's kind of template with his iPhone, he was so precise in knowing how the camera was going to move and transition that it made Alejandro and my job a lot easier.
If I'm not mistaken, you kind of butted up against COVID a bit and had to research reshoots or you know, pickups. How does that work?
Honestly, well, that was one of the challenges. Is, I mean, stepping in and being promoted from second unit to then main unit, and then maintaining the look that Alejandro had established with Mo, but also at the end of the day, your boss and the person you're collaborating with is Mo, the director. And so if things have changed in that time period, he's watched the cut many times, we're doing reshoots, we're doing pickups, you want to keep it within the look and feel of the film, but you also, if there's things that the director wants, you have to give it to him. And so it was definitely a balance. It was definitely a balance of maintaining the work that was previously done while also seamlessly blending it with what Mo was looking for. And the time was challenging because talent ages. Some of the locations we had to reshoot at different ones and try to make them match continuity wise. Certain angles and certain just close-ups that we just had to cheat to feel like they were in a totally different space and keeping the color the same. It was definitely a challenge.
All right, final question. This is my background's education. Your time at Chapman must have been very interesting. Also led to a Student Academy Award. What was that experience at Chapman and leading to that?
Yeah. Oh my God. I moved out to. I was originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I had never heard of Chapman until I read about it in the American Cinematographer magazine. And that specific year, they had won the undergrad, the graduate, both narrative for cinematography, and they won the documentary for cinematography. And so I was like, I got to learn about this Chapman. And so I applied, and I was fortunate enough to get in, and I had the most amazing mentors of Bill Dill, ASC, and Johnny Jensen, ASC, that they taught us two different styles. Bill is very analytical, very precise, whereas Johnny's like, feel it from the heart. And so having those two intertwined gave us such a unique opportunity in how to find our voice, because everybody tells a story and how to shoot and use the camera and the lighting differently. And so having two contrasts kind of gave us the opportunity to figure out which was our style. But so going off of that, Esta es tu Cuba was my thesis film at Chapman University. It was directed by Brian Robout, an amazingly talented director. I love working with Brian. And yeah, we shot that in Puerto Rico. So I was there for about 8 weeks over the course of 2 years, doing some pickups and things like that, prep, location scouting. So that was a huge task, but it was really rewarding with the Student Academy Award. We also won a Student Emmy, DGA, and then the HBO Award as well. So it was 2019 was a beautiful stretch. Brian and I were at the Emmys, and then COVID hit. But no, it was I mean, I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for my education at Chapman, and I truly believe that. I mean, obviously, student loans and all that stuff is never fun, but the value in education and the relationships that I built through that, I mean, it's unforgettable.
Hold your breath. Now, I've read some SAG rules, and apparently, and I did not know this, you're not allowed to suffocate and kill your actors. Yeah. So what for you was the biggest challenge? Because you came on early, what was the biggest challenge of thinking about how are you going to pull this off?
Safety was the biggest challenge, for sure. What is an actor willing to do? Because everybody on the film and by everybody I mean the filmmakers, wanted things to be as practical as possible. So it's like when you see the film and you see the dust storms that Sarah's in, they're real. Like VFX adds to that, which is super cool. But the storms are real. So it was like, what is an actor willing to do? And then where do we draw the line? So, you know, of course you're going to draw the line at you can't come out of like a pyramid of dust. Like, A, the weight alone, but B, you can't breathe. And so it was one of those things where, you know, because the filmmakers were really responsible, contacted people early, asked all the right questions, they were able to get exactly what they wanted because we were able to make that happen for them.
Now you had to do a lot of doubles, like you know, since you couldn't do certain things. What was that process trying to match the actor, you know, to the, let's say, the body double?
Yeah. Well, so that's where Autonomous, the special effects lab, comes in. And at the time, they actually all got COVID. So all 14 of the people in the lab got COVID. And that's when Vincent Van Dyke effects and Hamer effects came in. And they were like, we can 3D scan. Because now, you know, we used to take life casts and everybody used to be in a physical life cast and people who were claustrophobic really dreaded that. And now we just 3D scan people and we do dental matches and we do eyelash matching, eyebrow matching. And so all of that detail gets really written in digitally and then the artists themselves create a practical silicone double of that. Meanwhile, they're sculpting these doubles freehand based off of a photo. And then they're sending them to me. How do you like how wide the mouth is? Does this look good to you? Or I would be like, ooh, his face doesn't actually move like that. Like, let's have it, you know, let's close the mouth a little bit more. It's all those like fine details that nobody thinks about for just a few seconds of revealing somebody dead after a dust storm.
And the interesting thing, like audiences won't know the technical aspect, but they will know something if your lash is just a little off. They're going to say there's something wrong, but they can't put their finger on it.
And that is exactly it, is like at the end of the day, a human is watching and a human is either going to have a disconnect or a connection to it. And so the less that's done digitally and the more that's done practically, making a silicone double of a body, the more the person is going to believe that, including the actors who are in the scene with him. You know, the weight of those bodies, you know, it was almost the same weight as the actors themselves. So, like, when our sheriff is pulling this kid out of the sand, the dust, spoiler alert, so sorry, you know, he was able to feel the weight of the body, you know, and that way they can do their job, and it's all because we did our job really, really well, really, really well.
So for you, it sounds like you really prefer as much practical as possible and only use visual when you have no other alternative.
Yeah, I mean, VFX has its place and where it should be and how it can be used, and it's stunning and it's beautiful, and I really appreciate, you know, moments where like an actor can't have contact lenses because it's really uncomfortable or they have astigmatism. You know, having VFX draw in contact lenses is a really valuable thing. So respect their craft, but give the audience as much practically as they can, and then VFX has a really easy job if they have to do anything on top of that. You know, and that's another thing, is work really close with your VFX person because you don't want them putting a shade of lipstick on that you didn't pick. And they can do that. So, you know, it's like, I didn't put berry on her. Why is she wearing berry? That was supposed to be nude, you know? So it's just one of those things where it's like, I can, you know, joke about it, but like there's a lot that can be done digitally. So like, why wouldn't you do as much practically so that things really scream authenticity and there's not that disconnect? And then VFX is just like the cherry on the sundae, you know?
Ryan's World. You were brought on really early in the process. What was your concerns or most challenges having to balance animation and real live action?
I had worked with the company Pocket Watch and Albie Hecht for years and years on different projects, but they were all short form. The longest being maybe 22 minutes, but this was the first full-length feature that Pocket Watch made. So it wasn't a great concern. It was actually more exciting than anything else. But we have a rapport by working together with each other for many years. So I had assumed that we would have to kind of reassess that relationship or that shorthand that you develop when you're working with somebody for years. But we didn't have to. It was we came to the spot. Well, we spotted during COVID, so it was over a Zoom session, and we started watching the movie, and Albie said, "Guy, just do what you do." So it was a very quick spot. We might have even skipped some sections that we knew didn't need music, but that was that was a relief to know that process. He was just going to let me go and then give me feedback after the fact, after I scored the whole thing.
Now you mentioned the short versus long. So did you feel like, oh, now that we're expanding from short, working short together, I can actually kind of take a breath and let it evolve, the music evolve, and kind of expand things I wish I could have done in the short form.
Yes, very much, because in short form, especially an 11-minute cartoon, you've got, if there's a theme involved, you've got about 5 to 10 seconds to spit it out and to make it identifiable to the listener, so that when you reuse it a minute later, the connection is made regarding the storyline, and that it repings that memory of, oh yes, this is his theme, or that's this theme. So it was really exciting to be able to write themes that were more like 30 to 60 seconds, or some of them would go for a minute and a half, which is much more like classic film scoring. And it was the classic 3-act story. So we were able to use themes, and we probably had four or five different themes that reoccurred in different forms throughout the film. And also it's a unique film because it's half animated and half live action. So it's a interesting concept to take some of the themes that were originated in a live action setting and apply them a little later on in the animation world.
So in some ways you have to adjust it. If you did this theme early on, you just have to tweak it enough, but also make it recognizable. The audience knows, oh, it is the original, but not the same.
Yes, and obviously as the story gets more intense and you're reaching toward the climax in the grand scope of the story arc, it tends to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So in the final victory scene, this is a kind of an action adventure film. We hear the main character's theme in a very, very large, he's throwing everything in there, synthesizers and strings and French horns, and very heroic kind of treatment of that theme that maybe we heard as a very small little guitar or electric piano the first time in the first 10 minutes of the film.
Okay, just one last question about another piece of work, because I like it. Brady Bunch movie. How fun was it to try to create a 70s style music for a movie that's kind of a period piece but exists now, crossover, homage?
It was so much fun. I was a co-composer on that. Bill Reichenbach did, let's call an homage to the Brady Bunch TV music. And some of it we actually got the original scores from, I forget if it's 20th Century Fox, but we were looking at the actual scores of this thing that were, at that point, 30 years old. And he did a brilliant recreation when it really needed to be exact, when we wanted the score, or the director wanted the score to harken back to the TV, to make you feel like you were in the TV show. He did a brilliant job at that. And my job was more to, when we weren't in that kind of feeling of the TV show, they went into a little adventure here and there. They ventured out into LA, which is modern day, which at that point was 1995 or something like that. That was my thing. So the job there was to take some of these themes and modernize them, and to take the audience kind of back and forth in that way.
So when did you start screenwriting? Like, when did you think about this, I want to do it, even before professionally?
I mean, I always joke that I came out of the womb wanting to tell stories, and I spent my entire childhood filling notebooks with silly little stories, but never showed them to anyone. I didn't take my first screenwriting class until I was in college at UNC Chapel Hill, and that's where I really learned the format and the medium, and then I didn't really start showing anyone my screenwriting until I was working with Ivan Reitman at the Montecito Picture Company. I did not show Ivan my screenwriting, but it wasn't until I was working in development and actually was reading a ton of scripts where I went, oh, wait, I think I can do this. And I took a UCLA writing course. Their extension program's great. wrote a script about the making of Singing in the Rain. It got me repped. It blew up at one of the big agencies, and it was a finalist in the Nickel Fellowship last year with the Academy. So.
I was going to ask about that. So that must have been a surreal experience. But going back to what you said about the development, so reading good, and I know from because I did similar script reading, a lot of them are terrible, even that come to that. So did you think each time from even the good and bad, you were learning something new?
For sure, and I think something I talk about too in development is it's not just you read, go, good script, bad script. You have to go report back to your team and really analyze, like, well, this is why I like the script and why I think we should ask Sony for X amount of million of dollars to make it, and this is why I don't think we should. This is what I find didn't work in the script. So I think it was also, you're reading the best and the worst and everything in between, but then you're also thinking critically about it. And then that, I think, by osmosis, because I don't think I was doing it consciously, bled into my screenwriting, and I think ultimately made it better.
So for you, could you do so many other things? Moderating, hours and months of preps, talking to me, because it always takes months of preps. No, but you do.
We last spoke at Comic-Con, and I left San Diego, and I've been prepping ever since.
Exactly. Because a lot of screenwriting students I talk to don't fully understand the concept. You have to write a script to sell a script, even before. So what is your process doing? If you have so much other stuff going on, how do you force yourself to carve out time for the creative part?
I think it's been a big shift of, like, you have to keep that time sacred, and I think and also something I've been doing this year is I put it first. I think for the longest time I was like, I have to do this, and this, like all like the real life stuff, and then writing. But if I want writing to be my real life stuff and be my career and be how I make money and hopefully experience success in this world, it has to come first. So I also think there's part of that, like knowing when your ideal writing time is. Like, I cannot write at night. I don't go to sleep because my brain takes forever to like calm down. So, last year I was working a strike survival job, and I had a writing partner in the UK, and I would wake up at 6 a.m. and I would write before work. And then I would go into work and like have my soul sucked out of me, and then go home and sleep and do it all again. But I knew like we could not do it at night. And so for me, it's knowing yourself as a writer and knowing your own little biorhythms and stuff like that, and honoring that, and then also giving yourself the permission in a lot of ways to put it first if this is truly what you want to do.
And are you a big sequencing and putting on the note cards, mapping it out, or just kind of like finding it, while you're writing?
I don't know who does that. I can do that for like a short story, for like 1,000-word flash fiction prose. I'm like, let's just have a vibe. But no, for a screenplay, I love Blake Snyder in Save the Cat. He always says it because it's in the book, and it's written, and there it is. He says that screenplays are Swiss clocks of emotion. So I always outline. I think certain times I don't always need to go into cards. I think it's good to go into like the note cards, especially if you're collaborating with someone, so everyone knows what they're looking at. But I can't do anything without an outline. I need an outline. And then for features, I tend to use Blake Snyder's 15-beat sheet. And that's kind of my holy grail. And that's also a good way to know if you have an idea for a movie. I'm like, can I get 15 beats out of this? Like, do I know what the third act is? Do I know what the lowest low is, what the midpoint would be, and all that fun stuff? And so that's kind of my process. Yeah, I have to. But it's also that funny thing too, where you have your outline, you plan it, then you also have to leave room for the discoveries that come inevitably during the writing process.
Actually, I like to write. I usually write the last 10 pages of Act 3 first. I need to know my ending.
Who are you?
I literally write the end, and usually it doesn't change, but my Act 1 is awful. Like, it takes me years to get an Act 1 right, but I usually, I like to start with an end scene or I won't write.
I want to like study you. Like, that's insane. See, I'm the opposite, where for me, it's like I get a couple, usually the first things that come to me are the fun and games bit. Like that first half of Act 2, like the fun stuff. And then it's like, okay, now I have to put all the scaffolding under that. And then I'll get to Act 3, and hopefully I'll have had enough scaffolding that it'll reveal itself. Like, how do I end this?
Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. It's a remake, so what was your concern when you first read the script? What was your initial reaction?
So the initial reaction was, the script actually hews very closely to the original in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's a big difference in that it centers around a black family, and so that created some different considerations and different cultural references, obviously, but. When I first read it, I thought there is something to this that it does translate whatever that magic of the original was, and it's not like the original was necessarily a huge box office hit or anything like that, but it obviously has a following. And so when I first read it, I thought that it had a lot of those key ingredients of the original, and also that it kind of had a refreshing. It cut against some of the trends that we see in teen-based entertainment, where it's like, I think of Euphoria, for example, which is like very hyper-realistic, kind of edgy, right? And this was definitely not that, even though the babysitter, it's like it's kind of a macabre setup. The babysitter dies. For all intents and purposes, it's a very innocent and age-appropriate kind of story, and I liked that about it. I thought it was kind of sweet in that way, and there was an opportunity to just inhabit that early 90s vibe again and bring it into, and just bring it into today's context.
So you want to me, it sounds like you want to pay some homage to the original, but don't want to, you also want to make your own. So was there a balancing act between doing that?
Definitely. Well, there was so much in the actual script that is that references the original, and even to the point where some original cast members are in the movie. There's a cameo by the original the actor that basically right on top of that rose. So she makes a cameo in the end. So there was all that in there anyway, and kind of references to the original. The trap, we felt, was trying to make it, getting into the trap of trying to make it sound like the 90s. And we felt like the nostalgia and the references would come through, and that the score and the music really should be its own thing and have its own identity. And we really tried to go for more of a like the word we kept going back to was classic. We wanted it to be classic, something classic and not just watchable but rewatchable. And yeah, the director Wade Elaine Marcus and I, we've been friends for a long time, and we used to get hooked on movies. I mean, we're kind of products of the late 80s, early 90s, and there were movies from that time that we would just get hooked on and watch over and over again, and that was kind of what we were going for here.
Speaking of that, for the last question, then what movie, if you were to recommend to a student who's learning, the closing part, what movie would you from the 80s perhaps recommend for them to study?
For music from the 80s, interesting. Well, I mean, I would say you can't go wrong with John Williams. Can't go wrong with Home Alone. That was actually a big reference for this. Wade actually said to me at one point, and he was like, he gave me some direction. He was like, think black John Williams. And I was like, interesting. I'm not black and I'm not John Williams, so this should be a challenge. But I think what he meant was capturing some of that sweeping sense, and we needed that actually. It was in the end the movie has an 80-year-old white woman die in the hands of 4 black kids. We needed to do something that helped suspend the audience's disbelief and just let them not take it too seriously and just kind of see it for what it was. So yeah, that's I'd say can't go wrong with John Williams. Even though there's others out there, other composers. I'd say look at Carter Burwell. He's great. And anything that he does with the Coen brothers is pretty much fantastic.
All right, so we're going to go back, since I have a lot of students in the audience. Let's go back to beginning. You worked on a lot of short films. Yep. What was that process for you, helping you kind of find your voice?
Boy, wow, short films. I think, when you're starting out, right, you're trying to find potential collaborators who are going to, who are going to bring you up with them as they move along in their careers. I think it's a safe space to sort of experiment, to find your voice, but it's also just a great place to meet people. And to try to impress them with your work and what you can do. So I think with a short film, just do the best work you can do. Don't treat it like, oh, it's just a short film. Treat it like it's a real project, because it's a real project. And those relationships, you know, The Silent Planet, which I talked about in the panel, Jeff St. Jules, his Canadian Film Centre thesis film was the second real short film that I had done, and we've been working together now for almost 20 years. So.
And also, it would sound like to me you get to explore different genres, because you might not think you would like a certain genre if you didn't experiment.
Absolutely, you know, and I think that, you know, especially, you know, short films notoriously have no money, right? as we all know, and I think it's just, you know, at that stage in your career, money can't be the deciding factor in terms of whether you're going to do a job or not. The big credibility that you'll have going into the industry is your credits, you know, hence the name, you know, credibility. And the more credits you bring to it to get to the next rung, your first paid gig, your first feature film, your first television show, your first whatever, you know, all of that gets linked back to your credits, right? So you want to amass as many of those as you can and develop those relationships.
All right, so then now you got a working gig, Human Odyssey. So what was the challenges in working on that?
So Great Human Odyssey was a while ago. That was, gosh, almost 7 or 8 years ago. But how I managed to get that gig is that I worked with another director, a director team on a project, and they had found me kind of Googling me. And one of the director's production partners was kind of walking by the editing suite, and he's like, oh, wow. Where's that music from? And that's sort of how Niobe found me. Oh. And what's interesting about, you know, so the 3-part miniseries, and one of the things that I'll say is that it's one of those rare documentaries that had a really amazing music budget. We recorded with the full orchestra, we recorded with the choir, all union, all on board, everything like that. And it was really sort of, you know, for a composer, it's as good as it gets, right? Like it's really as good as it gets. And what's interesting is that, you know, when you're working with someone new, it takes some time to develop that relationship, right? So we had 3 episodes that we need to get through in about 8.5 weeks. It took us 4 weeks to get through episode 1 and 3.5 to get through episodes 2 and 3, right? And that's just because you're developing that relationship. You're kind of understanding, okay, when he says this, he means that, you know, this is what he means by all of these sort of notes here and there. And I think that once you have that trust, things go by a lot faster. Our second miniseries that we worked on, Equus Story of the Horse, Niobe and I, the process was, I don't want to say that the process is acrimonious. The first miniseries, we were just figuring each other out, but without that sort of pretense of, like, you know, ego or trying to figure stuff out, we were just able to get to that finish point a lot easier and a lot faster.
All right, so as a hockey fan, I'm a New York Rangers fan. I grew up in New York. What was it like reimagining the theme for CTV of hockey?
You know, I mean, so that gig was one of the very first gigs that I did. I was like 26 at the time, right? And they sort of go like, if you can imagine, so this hockey theme is sort of, it's, for Canadians, like they call it the Canada's second national anthem, right? You know, and originally the gig for me was to redo the theme for NHL and TSN, which would have been an amazing gig in itself. But then all of a sudden, it's just like, oh wow, this opportunity they had, TSN had to pick up this theme song from CBC. They did it, and then just all of a sudden the gravitas of the situation just got like exploded by about 1 billion, right? And I was trying to explain to my agent, I was living in Montreal at the time, and my agent was in LA. I was just trying to explain to her how culturally significant this gig was, and she just didn't quite get it, right? It was incredible because, you know, you're working with essentially the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, right? You know, and you've got this huge budget that you're trying to manage, and like, you know, like I said, like I was 27, like fake it till you make it sort of thing. We had an amazing team. I have to say, you know, the good people at CTV, Mike Noonan and his audio production team really supported me well with this. We had fantastic players, and it was just to be that storied part of Canadiana was just amazing, right?
And so, blending your two passions.
Absolutely.
Early in your career, Evil Dead. Yeah. Low budget at the time. Mm-hmm. How did that help doing something when you have no resources?
Well, I was new to it. That was one of my first, pictures, so I wasn't aware that we were doing it low budge. But it was a lot of fun, doing, everybody on it was very passionate about it. I got to work with Sam Raimi, which I got to work with him again later on Spider-Man, so that was a great thing, working with the young Sam Raimi, watching him do it when he's so capable, and it was early in his career, but what a great guy, what a talent.
And that's true. So working together gave you kind of a language. Yeah, all the crew, a language, and then you get an expanded budget for Spider-Man. You actually have more resources. Did it help you that you knew how to do it on the lowdown, but now you can kind of grow?
Yes, absolutely. And I had also done a lot of TV, which you need to do quickly. And although it may not be budget challenge, you are time challenge, which means move quickly. Try to get it right the first few tries, and then when you have the time, it's wonderful.
All right. Well, interesting you say TV because you happen to work on the pilot of one of my favorite TV shows, and to set the sound, Rome.
Yeah, I did Rome for a season, and that was a big budget thing, and it was wonderful. We got to go record sound effects and record crowds, and that was a wonderful experience.
And you're doing a lot of outdoor and indoor things too, because you have the epic, some of the epic battles outside.
Yes, absolutely. Some of the biggest battles I ever did, sound for battles, was for Rome. Big, sword and axe battles, a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
So you recommend people do at least one kind of gladiator, Rome, Game of Thrones in their life?
Yeah, absolutely. My ears are still ringing.
No, that's great narrative work, but now we go. You've done documentary like Tony Hawk, and the wheels come off. Is there a different approach to the sound on that? Or are you more constrained on it for time? How does that work differently?
It is a bit of a different beast. It's lower budget, of course. I love doing documentaries because that's what I watch for pleasure on my own. I just love learning and teaching. So when you're doing documentaries, you're sharing information with people, and I enjoy that a lot. So I find a lot of pleasure in doing documentaries.
You mentioned we have a kinship, LMU. So how has it been, entering the world of teaching?
I love teaching. I love it. I think, when you're an artist, as we all are, you like to make things and share it with people and have it move them, and it changes them, inspires them. And if you're working on a good project, that's what happens. And it's the same for teaching. You share things with people. You can inspire them. You can move them. And I love doing that.
You've been a writer a long time, which we'll get to. But so now you do for Women Dies Alone, you're doing writing and directing.
Yes.
So what was the challenge of transitioning from behind the computer to behind the camera?
I started out producing with an eye toward directing, and I actually kind of fell into writing. So directing has kind of always been at the back of my mind. I just love it. And you also, you don't want to direct on the page when you write, but you kind of have to. You're kind of creating that world and coming up with that point of view. So it was just a chance to take it from beginning to end versus just putting something on the page and handing it out for others. It's a really nice time to just take it all the way to the end yourself.
And as a former writer, the director, when they yell at you, is yelling at yourself.
Yeah, right. I did when I was in post on Woman Dies Alone. I sent an early cut to my agent, and I was like, the director's great, but the writer, she's crazy.
Now, your film has some monologues in it, longer. So, so what were the challenges in shooting those to try to keep them fresh? Or did you also have to rewrite them theoretically after shooting? You're saying, you know what, it's not working perfectly.
I didn't, fortunately, and that 100% goes to casting Barrett Doss. When I wrote it, it was almost like a one-woman show on the page, and I literally told myself, ask Barrett. If she says no, we're not making the movie. But she said yes, so there we go.
So do you think all this directing experience, when you go back to writing, like when you focus on writing, you think it's helped you kind of get the other perspective of it?
100%. 100%. Every time you shoot something or somebody else shoots something you write, you learn for the next time. You learn, oh, well, that didn't quite translate or that doesn't quite work. So, yeah, sometimes when you write, particularly for TV, and you're like, well, I hope the director has fun with this one. But when you're writing it to direct yourself and yeah, you're gonna have to make good on it. It's a completely different experience.